know there are doubts that creep into people's minds. I know there's a tendency during tough times for folks to turn on each other and get mad and get angry. But our history tells us that each and every time we face a choice between the easy road that leads to slow decline or the hard road that leads to something better, something higher, we take the higher road. That's how Americans are. We refuse to stand still. We always want to move forward. And that journey doesn't start at Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. And I'm glad everyone is here. Thank you, first and foremost, for coming out to this conversation on the brink of Ferguson, the state of the black man in America. So this is in continuation with the Mindy Jo News Show. So the Mindy Jo News Show shares news that you can absolutely use. So the last show was with regards to what occurred in Ferguson. We're all aware of Mike Brown. But where do we go from here? From what happened in Ferguson, this affects, the African American man everywhere, not just in Ferguson. So tonight, we'll get a few questions as far as, what are things we can do, and we can learn what are some solutions and get some very knowledgeable information. So enjoy and welcome again. And it comes from the Congresswoman's office. She says, congratulations. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all those attending the symposium on the brink of Ferguson, the state of the black man in America. I congratulate the Institute for African Man Development and PR Wiz LLC on this wonderful, important conversation. I applaud the impact and engagement of such a critical conversation in our community and our country as you discuss the state of the black man in America. We are honored to have an event such as this in our city. My best wishes for a fantastic event and a continued future success. So right now, it gives me great honor and distinguished pleasure to introduce our first panelist guest, the honorary Yes, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the honorary Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jesse Jackson is the president and founder of the Rainbow Push Coalition. He has received the President's Award, and he is really one of our civil rights leaders right here. He's the man, he's the man, and he was actually running for president, before Obama ran for president. But no more need to further explain. I will let him introduce what his agenda is as far as the African American men entering to the technology sector. Currently, right now, the statistics, according to the Institute for Education and Science, they are projecting for the year 2022 that it will be an increase for Hispanics and Latinos as far as entering education, post-secondary education, and things of that nature, with a 5% graduation rate for African American men. And it really is in the District of Columbia as well, this 5% effect. So recently I had the opportunity to visit a panel discussion which Microsoft gave, and it focused on empowering the Hispanics and Latinos. I don't know if you guys are aware, but Before Ferguson, Reverend Jesse Jackson was actually visiting Silicon Valley. And this effort was due to the employment disparities for minorities and Black African American men. So with his efforts, that has allowed more opportunities for men that will be graduating with engineering degrees who are able to utilize the technology softwares. So I will go ahead on and let the Reverend speak on that initiative.
Good afternoon, family. I'm delighted to be with you tonight. If you want to, our schedules are expanding given the events. This weekend I just got in from New York today. I was supposed to be at an event yesterday at the King Memorial site, but I was up there meeting with the president of Haiti about the predicament of Aristide, and to convince him and his foreign minister alike to restore unto President Aristide his security, protect him, his family, his home, and to not make the mistake of putting him in jail or arresting him. And I thought that being with President of Haiti and talking with Mildred and President Aristide was a priority, so that's why I was not here. So for those who thought I would be, let me express my apologies. That is a priority I chose on yesterday. Secondly, the civil rights struggle as we know it, human rights struggle, is not an event. I went to a march, I stood up at a place at a given time. It is a daily struggle and nightly, and never a straight line. The question is, where do we go from here? When Emmett Till was killed, and then June 7th, where do we go from there? We went from there to fight to end Jim Crow laws. We went to fight for the right to vote. And that was important because the killers of Emmett Till meant to be able to walk the streets known to other people for 40 years. Because we didn't have the power to serve on juries. We didn't have the right, the power to prosecute. It's an fault for us to have the right to be on juries, and the right to prosecute, the right to protect our interests within the law. There are some today who are not using those powers that we inherited from those who became martyrs in the process. So if you're playing football, since we're in that season, if you stop short of the end zone, you can't score. If you go beyond it, I think scoring touchdowns is irrelevant. You can't do it. You have to stop at the end zone. I'm trying to say when we were in Ferguson, I met with a group of young people, students and men and women, and said, in light of what's happening, we got to have a tremendous door-to-door, hand-to-hand comeback voter registration effort. In the city where there are 3 blacks every 1 white, who are eligible to register and vote. That will control every office of every contract in town. The one young man said, look, Rev, I'm not into that voting shit because really I want to be on down. I said, well, would you like to be on the jury when Michael Brown's killer comes to court? He said, sure, you're right, because I want to bust him. He said, you do know only the registered voters can serve on juries. He said, oh. We had the awesome power of the vote, and had no sense of its power. It's not only can you be on the jury, you also can elect judges. You also can elect sheriffs. They're on the ballot too. The prosecutors on the ballot too. Matter of fact, you can elect the mayor in this city who appoints police and fire chiefs. There's nothing here you cannot be, no contract you cannot take. They had no basic understanding of how to use weapons earned by those who paid the ultimate price not so very long ago. So we're going to look at the weapons issue. One weapon being our marching feet. Marching does matter. Protest matters. Voting matters. economic boycott matters, enforcing the laws we have, all that matters. And so it's one engaged in a given struggle, learning how to fight is so critical. And so it strikes me that in one issue in Ferguson is that in the short time, not only can they recall the mayor, they can become the mayor and control every facet of the budget of Ferguson. That goes to the question of some of us, it seems to me, have lost the will to fight back. In Montgomery, the home of Rosa Parks and Dr. King in 55, the city is 58% African American, and they don't have a mayor. They have a right-wing Tea Party mayor in Montgomery. They have 58% of the voters in black colleges. Something is missing. In Chicago, where there's a big debate about who will become the next mayor, can we win, who has the most money. The last election, Emmanuel got 300,000 votes total who became the mayor. There's 650,000 blacks alone registered to vote. And a new 50,000 just come on the books, that's almost 700,000. 700,000 voters, and we're arguing about can we win? Because we can't match their money, cannot match us in votes, and match us in these. We got 700,000 votes still doubting. Can you win the election with 300,000 votes as the winner for sure? And 350 the very most. And so what is Ferguson or Montgomery or what it is Chicago? Chicago, which I'm quite familiar with, that city closed 50 public schools, closed 50 drugstores, closed 72 grocery stores, closed hospitals, trauma units, and 80,000 abandoned homes and vacant lots. The banks got bailed out, we got locked out, and left out dribbling the property. It's the whole of the donut. Ferguson really is a metaphor for urban America. There's a bunch of Fergusons across the country. They got dry chips, just waiting for some spark to send them off. We must demand a comprehensive urban reconstruction plan. Time to reveal again the Kerner Commission report, as Ron Daniels talked about. The Kerner Commission report to look at, and we don't need a new study to implement that study. We simply can have 3 Chicagos. On our side of the town, unemployment 35%. The north side is about 3%. Suburbs got jobs on the sides. And so that terrible imbalance is what our struggle must be about in that situation. Last time, the Silicon Valley project we were working on is that when Apple came out, we couldn't wait to get a bite of the apple. But Apple got worms in the child. All white board directors, all whites in the C-suite, 2% African American employees, and no money available by absent and our code learned by our youth. Well, a plan at this point for interns going from Howard to Silicon Valley to wherever they want to go. And so what we've done, these companies filed a lawsuit and appeal to the judge to protect them from having to file EEO reports. They argue it would interfere with their ability to be a fair competition. So we bought shareholder stock with the shareholders meeting and said, Mr. Chairman, I want to see our data on our companies. If we have 40% index on buying in Twitter, why can we not have any people on the board, our C-suites and employment? And that's when they began to open up the data you referred to. That data came from protests. Again, learning how to use one's weapons effectively. In the context of closing schools and building jails for profit, I had to pull. And there are many battles along the way. But don't miss an opportunity to land the blow. There is an election come November, and we have not earned the right to do less than our best. There's an element of waiting. On a non-vote, they intend, as they're doing it right across the South, from Virginia around to Texas, rejecting Medicaid. What does that really mean? Let me give you one state, South Carolina. 1/4 of all South Carolinians are in poverty, the poorest people, poor black and poor white. The governor rejects $11 billion, which will strengthen every economic institution in the state and protect people from going bankrupt because of health care costs. From Virginia around Texas, they're rejecting every dime of federal health care money. All they don't want the feds to tell the federals what to do. They'll accept money for interstate highway. 45% of their state budgets is federal money. They accept federal money for seaports and airports and tourism and military bases, but not accept money for the poor. That is a very legitimate reason to fight for our own interests. People are literally dying because they cannot get Medicaid. Cannot get Medicaid. That's a right now. That's a reason to vote. It seems to me right now. I would think that as we look at North Carolina removing voting from campuses, in Texas you can use a voter, you can use a gun ID, but can't use student ID to register. There are some low-hanging grapes if we were to fight. And I would think we should not miss this issue of reparations one bit. We must fight no matter what the cost, the repair, the damage done. If there were no money involved, we are the creditors, America's the debtor. Just start right there. We are the creditor. We are not the debtor. We are the creditor. It's with that power that we fight back and let nothing break our spirits. Thank you very much.
Now I will open up the panel for a quick question for the Rev. So does anyone have a, sure, if you can come to the microphone here.
My question is, Burger Jackson, do you think that there are policies in place, maybe an ability to get funding and banks or other legislative policies that are just precluding and undermining the ability of the Black communities to start businesses and free opportunities for our students graduating and being employed? What's holding us back in terms of free business?
Well, it seems to me that we have chosen this season pride over policy. We don't even fight for a policy of reinvestment. We don't even fight for emerging policies. So we have mayors with great needs for service and no resources to service our people. And we are subsidizing other people and not demanding a policy of ourselves. That needs to be a policy of urban reconstruction. We need affordable housing. Student loan debt is greater than credit card debt, all the loan debt. We should in fact be paying folks to go to school as opposed to getting paid for them going to jail. And I would hope that as we fight with vigor and tenacity, that we have an agenda that we can fight for. Because many people I see go from event to event will not dig in and fight, because this is a long-term battle. It requires use what you got every day. Vote, yes, that's not enough. Leverage boycotts, yeah, that's not enough. Will to not give up, yeah, that's not enough. All of this matters, but it's not, again, I repeat, that I fight and not just be seen as an episode or as an event. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, I can't stand up. I have First of all, Reverend Justin Jackson, thank you very much for your comments. As you were talking, I'll try to make my question very brief. It has to do with the development of the 21st century agenda that notes the demographic shift that 76% of African Americans live in the South, number one. Number two, how is it that we deal with certain issues in a society of disposability and human waste? Number three, it's important to vote, but what happens when people who we voted in did not tell us about the militarization of police departments around the country who are aiming their weapons at African Americans? How can we catch up with what has happened and develop an agenda that is realistic for the 21st century, recognizing finally that we live in a capitalist technocracy where only a few people are essential and matter?
Well, it seems to me, you raised a number of questions. We cannot just vote and go away. Voting is a step in a longer-term process. We cannot vote and not remain activists as issues roll off every day, because we oftentimes vote and assume somebody will cover our back, and they won't cover their back unless you in fact are in their face when it's time for confrontation. Second, I'm concerned about our own sense of self-deprecation. We do not have a problem with how we do it in joking or whatever, calling each other the N-word, kind of deprecating, and we learn to laugh at ourselves on that ignorance. When in Chicago, again, weekend, 12 people are shot, the question is, who did it? What was it? Well, the black people shot us, but that's just life in the ghetto. If really given weekend, if 12 black people been shot by white folks, the whole nation would rally. It's almost like when blacks shoot whites, it's jail time, quick. Whites kill blacks, it's riot time. Blacks kill blacks, it's middle time. Nobody has the right to kill us. We cannot even let the man's surrogates kill us. Nobody has the right to kill black people. And then, so what happens, all these killings are hate crimes. We must stop the killing. In Chicago, there were gun shops, drugs in, guns in, jobs out. That's a policy. We must fight such a policy. And that's a grinded out kind of fight. Then when the election comes next March, will we fight back or will we step back? I hope we will fight back.
I'd like to thank you for the comment you made about repairing the damages. Because there are many damages that not even been produced. Now, our concern is, or I guess my question is, why do people not understand that it's hard for people to continue to come out and vote for someone who does not address the issues? For example, the H.R. 40, the bill to set up a commission to study the institution of slavery and the lingering negative effects. All these issues that we're suffering. The bill was introduced by Congressman Conner in 1989. It hasn't even gotten out of committee. How can we continue to have trust and faith in our elected officials, or I should say congressperson, when they won't even get to those important issue relative to our conditions out of committee?
Let me say this. If you have the Democrat has the black caucuses for the most part, the Republican House, they can get it beyond the committee because it will never be called. Congressman John Conyers, for 13 years, had the King holiday on the agenda. He was laughed at as being unrealistic as they tried to plot to destroy Dr. King even in the grave. At some point in time, we never gave up. We went outside the political process. She did the song Happy Birthday Martin Luther King, and we got into a rhythm and rhyme. And we just rammed the holiday down their throats because we didn't give up. It never really came to the regular process. It came because he put it out there and gave us something to fight for.
Right. Well, if I recall, that bill was introduced to work in I think it was introduced in '89. The Democrats have had control of the presidency, the House, and the both parties since then.
Absolutely.
And it didn't move then either.
The same is true with the D.C. statehood.
Exactly.
It's the same true. But that's why if you put water on fire and then put the fire, don't conclude water won't put fire. Keep putting more water. Water will put out fire. That means this is a long distance race. I threw one lick and he didn't fall. He got tough jaw. That's why I say this is not an event. This is a long-term struggle. Also, we were talking privately about this immigration situation. I'm concerned that whatever comes down applies equally to Haitians and Africans as well as it does people coming across the southern border. If Haitians come across the water they either left to die on the shore or they sent to Guantanamo or arrested. If Cubans come across, they're subsidized and sent for. We must, comprehensive immigration reform cannot just be one group, it must be comprehensive. They could make it more difficult for Africans to get to the country, for example, and Haitians as well as. So that's a critical issue for us because Haiti is the credit that what we brought with, and we as a nation, were unfree, was Haiti who joined the fight for America's freedom. We are in Haiti's debt, and I think we must feel honor that relationship.
And all due respect.
Thank you so much, Rev, for that. And right now, that will end our first discussion as far as the Black men in the technology sector, as well as which ways we can move forward from the Ferguson issue. So next, hold on one second.
My leaving is not disrespectful to our conversation, so we have some rest of cover. I'm hopping and skipping around, so I'm thankful for allowing me to share with you tonight. God bless you.
So next, we are honored to have actually the co-host of this event as well, Mr. Chester Marshall. So he is the CEO founder of the Institute for African American Development. I encourage you to please visit the website for them, their Facebook page, to find out further information. And I will say, when I reached out to Mr. Marshall, it was without hesitation that he was committed to come and speak on this critical issue. Because mental health, after all, is a very critical issue, and I think in the African American community, it's kind of frowned upon when people, say they'll go get counseling or something, it's kind of frowned upon. But we'll actually get some better insight as to the state of mental health, especially as it relates to African American men. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I'm going to do the handheld because I don't want to be bending over. I want to be able to look out and see you, even though your images are blurred. I want to have face-to-face contact. First of all, thank you, Mindy, for reaching out. I appreciate you. There are many people who could call, and I'm grateful that you called me. Thank you all, you beautiful souls that are out there, for being here. I'm glad that we are talking about mental health. It's something that we talk little about, or in some cases completely ignore. Our mental wellness is the foundation of human function. When folks are not mentally balanced, they don't do very well. Now, we're going to talk more about that, but I want to kind of set the stage for what I'm going to say by, first of all, defining what we call Black men, or actually to give more context to that. In popular media, Black men are kind of lumped together. And we're lumped together with poor life outcomes. So that when you listen to popular stories and you listen to popular conversations, it would seem as though all African American men are doing bad. Well, let me explode that myth. I'll make a distinction in my writing between two categories of African American men. One I call the victorious brothers. The others I call disconnected brothers. The victorious brother is the everyday African American man and boy walking the face of the earth. The one that is doing his best. The one that is trying. The one that is trying to push forward and advance. That's every other African American man that you see walking the face of the earth. That is never talked about. Never talked about. No exposés, no pieces in magazines and newspapers. He is just not talked about. In fact, he's minimized. Every time we try to suggest that most African American men are not struggling, we are met with pushback. There's a second group of African American men that I would like to talk about, and those are the brothers that we call disconnected. To say one is disconnected means that he is cut away from the elements of his life that should sustain him. Now, what are the elements of our life that should sustain us? Our families, our communities, our ancestral heritage, which we'll talk about, our values, cultural specific rituals, institutions that would be helpful to us. Disconnected brothers are cut away from these things, and that's why they're not doing well. Let's tie that into mental health. The overwhelming majority of African American men that are experiencing poor mental health are disconnected. They are disconnected from the things in their life that should sustain them. This is not rocket science. When you don't have a family base, when you don't have a community base, when you're not connected to institutions, when your values are skewed, when you don't understand cultural mandates and your ancestral heritage, you are bound to be disconnected in some kind of way. So it's not rocket science. And so I want to make a distinction between the brothers that we're talking about today, because we're talking about the brothers, the victorious brothers, and we're talking about the brothers that are disconnected. Now, let's talk about what mental health is. In my profession, social work psychology, mental health is defined as the absence of psychiatric disorders. So if you're not bipolar or schizophrenic, or if you're not talking to yourself or seeing things, you're not necessarily classified as mentally ill. However, we understand that mental wellness is much more than not having psychiatric symptoms. What is mental wellness? It's the ability to give and receive love. It's the ability to transcend challenges that we face on a daily basis. It is the ability to make a difference and to have a legacy. It's the ability to be resilient in the face of crises. That's what positive mental health is. The overwhelming majority of African Americans are experiencing some level of positive mental health. But because the stories are not about those people, you do not see that that's the case. In fact, what you see is that the opposite is true. I will add another element to the mental health of African Americans. Every African American has to face the question of how are you dealing with racism? In addition to all the other things I'm going to talk about in mental health, we have to deal with the issue of how is the black man dealing with racism? We call it in African-centered terms the ma'afa. It is the continued destruction of African-descended people across the globe and the effects of that process. Now, unfortunately, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Eric Gardner in Long Island, and John Crawford in New Bedford are the popular faces of the many African-American boys that have been slaughtered since Trayvon Martin. When I say many, I mean hundreds, maybe even thousands since Trayvon Martin have been slaughtered. And the hundreds of thousands that have been slaughtered within the last few decades. They are the popular face. Now, another compelling question that I want to answer. Where does positive mental health come from? It comes from being a protective environment that ensures your continued development. It comes from being in a family that provides nurturance. And it comes from, most importantly for African Americans, cultural continuity. Let's talk about the protective environment. Now, if any brother in here believes, or let me ask the question, does any brother in here believe that America is a protective environment for African American males? I certainly don't believe so. Now, we see young boys getting shot down all across the country with impunity. That is a trauma trigger to all of us. We get the sense that we're not safe. We get the sense that we're out here by ourselves. We get the sense that we are not afforded the same level of human dignity that other people are. That contributes to poor mental health. Now, we also talk about another term in African-centered circles, cultural intuitive recall. Cultural intuitive recall is the recall of the atrocities that have historically been perpetrated against African American people, including slavery. Now, I heard my brother say that we have a lot of stuff going on. I think, brother, I wrote it down. We have a lot of damages. That's a very good way of putting that, because while we don't want to talk about it, slavery continues to be a powerful metaphor in the development of mental health in African Americans, because we haven't dealt with it in any kind of collective or effective way. Now, collective intuitive recall says that when we see black bodies floating in Katrina, when we see young boys being shot down all across the country, that triggers the historical memory of slavery and other atrocities. Now, in conventional terms, they call that cellular memory, because you all know that when we memorize things, it creates a pathway in our brains. That's what memory is. So it is very possible to have the trauma and the atrocities that were perpetrated against people that came before us to be projected to the people who come after them. Protective environment. Another thing, coming from families that provide nurturance. Now, most African American families, and I want you to follow up, do research, Google it, do whatever. Most African American families are doing their best. They're providing the nurturance that leads to their children being successful and moving forward. I don't know in this last season the amount of children that I've seen families sending them to college. Countless. I've seen more children in this season go to college than I have go to jail. But nobody's talking about it. The lights are not on them. The stories are not on them. We only hear from the victorious brothers when they get in trouble or when they get a lot of money. Thirdly, cultural continuity, which is very, very important for African Americans, because in the African American community, mental health is not defined by the individual, it's defined by the group. The basic unit of life in Africa and in African American community is the group and not the individual. It's the we versus the I. So what goes on in the group has a powerful impact on what happens to the individual. Yes? All right, so if there is a breakdown in cultural continuity, which my brother will agree, and I'm sure you will agree, there's a breakdown in cultural community in the African American community. So that when an African American loses their way, we don't say he has lost his way, he has lost our way. He has lost our way. What's our way? Our way is the way that survived bestiality, being kidnapped from our homeland, the Middle Passage, 300 years of savage treatment here on these shores, the continued destruction of African Americans on these shores. We should all be crazy. But the real story is that most of us are not. We have survived it and we have thrived. We have teenage millionaires. We have doctors, lawyers, scholars. We have politicians. We have professors. We have thrived and survived in spite of. African Americans have excelled even when the playing field is not level. Now, we are not a monolithic group of people. All of these atrocities that I spoke of has had a relative different effect on different people. Some of us have done well. Some of us that are just doing our best. Others of us are really, really struggling. Those are the brothers that we call disconnected, and the overwhelming majority of those brothers are experiencing some level of poor mental health. Our way, a historical way that we have dealt with atrocities is woven into the fabric of our cultural milieu. All we need to do is reach back and fetch it. We have never been second-class citizens. We have never been people that cannot resolve our own problems. We have always applied the spirit and African intelligentsia to resolve our issues. And that's what you see this weekend. We can do this. We have to apply that to the ones that are most needy, which is the disconnected brothers. Some of us have lost our way and we've came back. Others have lost our way and we're on our way back. But then there are others who have lost our way and they have forgotten to come back. Or they just do not know how to come back. And those are the ones that we call disconnected. Those are the ones, brothers and sisters, that really need our help. Finally, how can we provide help? What do? And there is a lot we can do that we're not doing. First of all, of course, I'm going to say the way to support the positive mental health of African American men is to return to our way. Everybody in here has a family history or a family story of how we used to operate in our families, the respect we used to have for our elders, the pecking order that we had, where young people were being nurtured by older people, where there was a certain mandate and a certain expectation of everybody in the family so that the family can continue to thrive and the individual can continue to grow. So the first thing I'm saying is that we need to return to elder initiation. Elder initiation simply means that young boys need elder wisdom to continue to live and to thrive and to meet life's transitions and challenges. They need elder wisdom. I'm 54 years old and I thrive on elder wisdom. I have elders in my life who show me the path. And when I get off of that path, they help me get back on it. Every man needs that. Every woman needs that. Secondly, teaching transcendence. How do we develop a sense of transcendence in our life? The only way that you transcend the challenges of life, the only way that you transcend your daily challenges, is to be connected to a circle of support. I remember being in grad school and I was renting a room from this older couple and I was whining about how hard grad school was. And the mother of the couple said, boy, let me tell you something. You can't do it alone, but you alone must do it. I'm like, wow, what does that mean? That means that I'm totally responsible for my life, but there's no way you can do it by yourself. That's how you develop transcendence in the African-centered sense of it. You develop a circle of support. Self-mastery, being in control of oneself. This is a great, great problem. This is what I believe has led to a lot of misdiagnosis of African American males in terms of mental health. Just not knowing how to have control of one's emotions, or control of one's presentation, or control of one's language can lead to people thinking that you are an oddball, or that there's something wrong with you, when actually you just haven't been taught to socialize. Last but not least, to attack the issue of masculine development. We have been juiced by images of patriarchal masculinity. What is patriarchal masculinity? It is the thought that men are better than women. That you need to be smarter and stronger and better than women. That is the Western imperative. We have been juiced by that and some of us have bought into that. So we need to return to a balanced sense of masculinity that says, look, according to the Dogons, all of us have twin souls, masculine and feminine. And that in order for us to be whole and complete and to grow, we all need to operate in those twin souls. And so those are the things that I think we need to focus on. We don't have enough time for me to talk about specific techniques, but that's my synopsis, and if there's any questions.
Yes, so now we will open up the floor for any questions. Yes, just state your name also, and if you're, university, business.
Yes, how is everybody doing? My name is Jerry Hayes. I'm a graduate of Stanford University, work full-time now as an engineer at NASA. I was curious because I believe in traditions. My family's from the South, and we believe in telling stories. Clearly, babies don't tell stories like other babies. Just going back to your cultural continuity and the memorization pathway you mentioned earlier, I believe in traditions, but I also believe in adapting with the times and being modern. It amazes me if I go to a DC restaurant week and I see little Billy with his family partaking in a DC restaurant week and being exposed to foods that are authentic and clearly not what you see little Dante believing is gourmet satisfaction, in the hood. And so what I'm trying to say is, when is the ideal period to start exposing kids? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put parents accountable. I believe in traditions, but parents have to learn how to adapt to modern times. We understand that, as far as technology and fashion and culture, those memorizations, those type of memories mean a lot. I believe it builds a person before they go to college. Because I understand that the brothers selling ice cold water in the Dominican Republic is a totally different hustle than the brothers selling ice cold water in Baltimore because of travel. So when do you expose young little Dante early in the game to adapt to modern times?
All right, thank you, brother. First of all, let me say I love that Afro puff. When I was growing up, man, you couldn't even be in if you didn't have one of them things. Let me say that when we talk about cultural continuity, we're saying that is how children, that is the foundation of development. Once we have cultural continuity, then we are able to move out into be exposed to other things in a strength-based way. The concern is that if we've never developed a foundation that's based on our cultural norms, that when we go out and expose ourselves to other people, we become confused because other people's stuff just do not work for us. Never have, never will. And so yes, there is no ideal time as long as a child or a person has been immersed and developed and nurtured in their cultural source. If that is, I still see a question on your face. Go ahead.
I think we're all the products of our childhood experience. There's no doubt. But I think parents have to step up their game in order to understand all the issues that are really going on locally and nationally, but that connection with their own kids.
Yeah, most African American parents are stepping up to the game. They're sending their kids to overseas for tours and studying abroad. They're exposing their kids to different things. So I think contextually, the people who are struggling to expose those kids to other things are people that are poor and disconnected. We are bastardizing single motherhood in this culture. Single motherhood is not the issue. It's being a single mother with no resources and poor that's the issue. Because single mothers who have resources, that have a circle of support, they're raising kids that are balanced just like kids that have two parents in the home. And so I agree with you that parents have to step up. They have to have the cultural base and they have to have the resources and support to do so. Thank you.
How you doing?
How you doing, brother?
So, you talked about cultural continuity and you talked about disconnection,
Yes,
right?
sir.
And so, as an educator and an artist, I'm very aware of that concept because I see it, in schools and I see it in the community, what have you. So, as an artist, one of the things I do to help create that connection is I'm a playwright, right? So when we tell our stories, we're passing on information and knowledge circuits. We have a collective experience which connects us, which is how we do what we do, right? So one of the things that I noticed when I started researching reparations is when you talk about it, most people say, reparations, man, what you talking about? It's a comedy, right? Right? But what I realized is that most people don't really know what happened. And this disconnection that you're talking about is a result of us not knowing what really went down, and we're dealing with the impact of all that. We're going to other people's institutions that are not helping us make those connections, and then we think we got something, walk out with a piece of paper, whatever, but there's a lot of disconnection. So, I say all that to say that I've written a play called Reparations for the purpose of, is this a plug? Yeah. But I wrote it because I saw the disconnection, and I understand what I need to do as an educated artist, as a parent, you see. So I want to say that if you're in this, are you in this area?
Yes, sir.
Okay, the play is happening at Morgan State University. The reading is, I got flyers, I'll show you.
I teach at Morgan State.
You do?
Yes, sir.
Great, so it's being done in the Theater Arts Department. Oh, right, great. So, so all I'm saying is that to help connect, I use the art to do that, because I agree with 100% that is connect in so many other ways.
Brother, let me say what you're Jared, right? Jared, what his comments are connected to yours. You're talking about a lot of us don't know what happened. Jared, that's where parents need to step up in the African American community and teach their children what actually happened.
Right.
Not necessarily so that we can harp on it or make excuses, but so that we will have a foundation to know how we historically made it over. Now, in terms of the images, let me give you a couple of examples in my own family about kids not knowing what happened. I can remember my first trip to Africa, and it was with Baba Dunstan back there in can't remember, Baba. Before I left, my niece asked me a question. Where are you all going to sleep? She thought that we were going to be sleeping in, I guess, Tarzan movies where you sleep in huts or whatever. She literally believed that. Now, I'm telling y'all a story of my own family. Don't laugh at my family. Secondly, I was presenting somewhere, and this young lady was in junior high school, and she asked me a question, and she stood up and she said, "Remember when y'all was back there in slavery?" Now, I laughed as hard as I could laugh, but she didn't know.
Right. Absolutely.
Nobody taught her
Absolutely.
what actually happened. That's what we're talking about when we say cultural continuity. To know where you're going, it's helpful to know where you've been.
Absolutely. And my play will help people. My name is Joseph Edwards.
Yeah, it's on. First off, my name is Eric, and I'm a high-tech professional here in the DMV. My question is, what academic theories or techniques are highly trained Black psychologists or sociologists doing to eradicate other forms of what I would consider as mental illness? Mental illness such as Black on Black crime, disrespect, lack of desire to patronize our own businesses, listening to degrading music, and calling each other the N-word, not viewing our own natural physical selves as beautiful, and I value education. In my opinion, I think these are some aspects, of mental illness. What are academicians in neuropsychology and sociology doing to help our community, people in our community, break free of those, degrading mentalities?
Well, let me say, brother, thank you for your question. I'm going to name some names. Naeem Akbar, Wayne Nobles, Malana Karima, Mama Marimba Ani, Joyce Myers out of Ohio. And those are just to name a few that have historically, Joseph White was a black psychologist. And Francis Quest Welsing. These are black clinicians who have created theories, counter-theories to understanding behavior in the African American community. All of them, the common denominator in their theory is it answers the compelling question, where did all of the behavior that we see in some African Americans come from? First of all, let's separate the victorious ones, because the victorious ones don't seem to be having the same behavioral challenges as the ones that are disconnected. Where did this disconnected behavior come from? All of them believe that it came from the results of oppression.